what I propose to do is to just chat with you for a little while, give you an overview of my perceptions of what's going on in Washington, and then we'll open it up for discussion and comments. Obviously, it is quite as important for me to hear from you as it is for you to hear from me, so you'll have as much time as you want to ask me questions or to make comments, and I hope that people are not shy. Obviously, I would have preferred 10,000 people being here, but the fact that it's a small group, the advantage of it is that we can have perhaps a better discussion. So I'll do my best to answer any questions that people have. The other thing that I have to say, truthfully, is I probably am not going to be able to answer every question that you have, because a lot of things are still in flux right now. As you know, the way the government works, to say the least, is a bit complicated. You have legislation which is passed in the House, and often that will be different legislation that is passed in the Senate. And the current situation now is that President Clinton has indicated that he may veto some of the key legislation, and after that we see what turns up after all of that. But I'll do my best to try to answer you some questions. Okay, before I get into the contract with America and the Republican budget, let me just give you some overviews, in my view, as to what's happening in the country and where we are right now. One of the things that disturbs me very much when I pick up the newspapers, although there have been some exceptions lately, but when I pick up the papers or watch television, there is a general assumption out there that the economy is doing just great. The economy is booming, and whether or not we'll be in for a soft landing is what I think they talk about. We don't know. The economists differ. But the economists are always cheerful. That's usually the word they refer to the economist. They must be a cheerful lot. The people that I talk to are not so cheerful, but maybe economists are born happy folks or something. So the overview, before we get into the specifics of the contract with America, is what's happening in America today. What is happening in the state of Vermont? And what's happening, not widely talked about, is that in the year 1973, 22 years ago, the United States reached its high point economically for working people and middle-income people in terms of wages and benefits. For average people, after World War II, in general, the wages and benefits and standard of living of the middle class went up, of the working class went up, of low-income people went up. Middle class expanded. More and more people joined the middle class, okay? After 1973, for a variety of reasons, what happened is there became a decline in the standard of living of working people in the middle class. Okay? In fact, since 1973, it's not a fact that Rush Limbaugh talks about too much, or Newt Gingrich, but since 1973, about 80% of American families have seen either a decline in their real, inflation accounted for, income or economic stagnation. Now, you know what I mean by real income is everybody gets a paycheck today bigger than it was in 1973, but has it kept up with inflation? For 80% of American families, the answer is no. At best, economic stagnation, same level. At worst, significant declines in real wages. In terms of the real wages that American workers have received, we're talking about a 15% decline in real wages. Okay? So you find very often now people working at the same job somebody else worked at 20 years ago, they're making significantly less in wages. That's the point number one. Number two, is everybody in that same boat? Has everybody seen a decline in their real wages? The answer obviously is not. The people on the top have never done so well. There's been an explosion in millionaires, an explosion in billionaires. So the people at the very top, the richest 1%, have done phenomenally well. And today, if you look about what's going on? How's the stock market doing? Stock market is at an all-time high. Okay. How are the wages of corporate executives today? At an all-time high. CEOs now earn 150 times what the workers in those companies are earning. What about corporate profits? Doing phenomenally well. So for the upper income people, things are going very, very well. For the middle class, things are not going well. The middle class is shrinking, and many people are falling out of the middle class into poverty. In terms of poverty, we now have significantly higher levels of poverty than we had 15 years ago. We have 5 million kids who are hungry. We have, I think, one of the more shameful aspects of what goes on in America, the highest rate of childhood poverty in the entire industrialized world, okay? So that's the overview of what's going on. What's also needs to be paid attention to is, what about the future? Are we looking at good jobs coming to the state of Vermont? And the Free Press, who I must admit I'm very critical of, and I think they do a terrible job in a lot of areas, deserves some credit. Recently, you may have seen the series that they did. And their point that they made was unemployment is not the major problem. Low-wage jobs are the major problems, and they're absolutely right in saying that. What kind of jobs are our kids open there for our kids? Decent paying jobs? No. Jobs that are out there $5, $6 an hour? If you don't have a college degree, you should be very nervous, because the jobs for the kids who graduate high school today for young men, 30% less in wages than was the case 15 or 20 years ago. 20 years ago, 25 years ago, if you didn't have a college degree, you graduate high school, you can go out and you get a job. You can, if you worked hard over a period of time, have a middle-class life. Not anymore. And even for those young people with college degrees, they're finding that the jobs out there are not paying very well. Very often they don't require the skills that a college degree has educated young people for. And that's what also scares a lot of people. What about the future? And what economists tell us is that for the first time in the modern history of this country, our kids are going to have a lower standard of living than we do. And that's pretty scary. Okay? Now, why is that? Well, again, economists will argue over it, people will argue. I'll give you just a few reasons, I think. Number one, an issue that does not get a lot of discussion is the whole trade issue. We will be talking about the federal deficit right now, which is a serious problem, but there's another deficit out there which is equally serious. Does anybody know what the trade deficit of America is going to be this year? Anybody have an idea? It's going to be about $160 billion. That means we are importing about $160 billion in goods and services than we are exporting. When you go to the local department store, when you go to Ames and so forth, where are the products that we are purchasing? Where are they coming from? Anyone know?
China.
That's right. Increasingly from China, from Mexico, from the Far East. What you are seeing when your kids go out and buy a pair of sneakers, I'll bet you dollars to donuts that if you check it out, those sneakers come from the Far East. It is almost impossible. Very few companies in America manufacture sneakers right now. But it's not just, and those sneakers, by the way, that your kids are buying, as you well know, are not $5 sneakers, right? They're $100 sneakers, but they are manufactured by people in Malaysia and in China who make, you know what the wages are in China? Who wants to guess?
50 cents a day.
Well, somewhere around that.
Cents per hour.
Yeah, it's 20 cents an hour. So, terrible working conditions. Obviously, they don't have the right to form unions. They don't have the right to get politically involved. Again, a fact that is not talked about very much, and we can talk about later why it is not talked about, is American corporations are investing about $750 billion a year abroad. In other words, corporate America is creating a hell of a lot of new jobs. The only problem is these are not jobs in Vermont, they're not jobs in America. They're jobs all over the third world where they're hiring people at very low wages. Okay, so that's issue number one, which is a major, major issue. Maybe we could talk about some ideas as to how we can deal with it. That ties into the whole issue of NAFTA and GATT. Talk about that if people would like. The second issue, which will get, I think, more and more prominence as the years go by, is the whole issue of automation and new technology. Some people think, well, technology is neutral. Technology will wipe out a certain number of jobs, but in the process it will create other new jobs, often high-tech jobs that will pay better jobs than the jobs it has wiped out. Up until this point, that is just not true. Some of you have been reading, and maybe some of you work at some of the banks in Chittenden County, right? What's happening to the workers in those banks? When you have these ATM machines, for example, what you're finding is the banks can do significantly more business with fewer workers. AT&T has laid off over 100,000 telephone operators. They handle more calls. It's hard to talk to a human being anymore when you make a telephone call. But the result of all of that is they can do more with less. Coal miners, way down. Steel workers, way down. Automobile workers, way down. Farm workers, way down. Technology has replaced huge numbers of workers, and it is simply not true to believe that all these wonderful jobs are out there waiting for those folks, especially if they are middle-aged. If you get laid off from your job and you're 45 or 50 years of age, it is very wrong to assume there's going to be another job paying close to or equal the wages that you are currently working. And it is not, it used to be just the blue-collar guys, you know, but it's not just blue-collar folks. It is now white-collar, middle-level management people are also being displaced all over America. So that is the whole question of automation and how, in fact, we can have full employment or low unemployment with all of this technology replacing workers is a very important issue. Third issue that I would touch on is simply the minimum wage issue. The minimum wage today nationally, in Vermont we got it up a little bit, but nationally is $4.25 an hour. In terms of purchasing power, that minimum wage today is about 26% lower than it was 20 years ago. So in other words, 20 years ago, a minimum wage worker actually had a significantly higher standard of living than does the minimum wage worker today. Okay, so that's a problem. The new jobs are being created are really very low-wage jobs. I would add to this concern the strong effort on the part of corporate America to break unions, harder for people to join unions and what that means and so forth and so on. So those are some of the reasons that, that Americans are becoming poorer. Okay. Now what's going on politically in the midst of all that? Let me take a... Politically, for many years, as you all know, for 40 years, the Democratic Party controlled the House of Representatives, and for most of that time, not for all, they controlled the Senate. In 1992, Bill Clinton was elected president. And I think, and I'm just giving you my own personal view now, what happened is in 1994, what you had in this country, and you have today, is increasing anger and frustration, okay? And in the extreme case, it leads to the militia groups and lunatics who blow up buildings in Oklahoma City or derail trains and kill people. They're a tiny, tiny minority. But all over this country, you have people who are angry. They don't quite know what they're angry about, and they're lashing out. 1994, people around this country looked around at the political landscape, and they said, we got a Democrat in the White House, we got Democrats in the Senate, we got Democrats in the House, and you know what? My life is not getting better. I'm working longer hours for lower wages. I'm worried about my kids. Hey, if I'm gonna get involved in politics at all, I'm gonna throw these bumps out. So what you had in 1994, two things. Number one, and the first point to be made, is what percentage of the American people came out to vote in 94? Anyone know? 39%. Okay, so 61% of the people did not vote. And the facts are very clear that low-income people almost never vote at all. They're not part of the political process at all. Upper-income people voted higher levels than lower-income people. With 39% of the people voting in Vermont, we did better. We had about 50%, but still not very good. Newt Gingrich and his friends took control of the House, and Bob Dole and his colleagues took control of the Senate. Now, the main issue, now we'll get into the contract with America, the main driving force for Gingrich and his friends is the federal deficit and the national debt. They argue, and I tend to agree with them, that the national debt, which is now approaching $5 trillion, that's with a T, $5 trillion is a lot of money. Even in Washington, that's a lot of money. And that it is important that we get a handle on it so that we don't leave this enormous debt to our kids. Number one, we're paying a whole lot of interest on that debt. And second of all, it hurts us economically. Okay, and I happen to agree with that. The question then is, how is the best way to address the federal deficit? Now, I should also tell you, good news, doesn't get in the papers very much, but over the last 3 or 4 years, the federal deficit, in fact, has gone down. You may remember at one point, 4 years ago, it was close to $300 billion. That means that's 1 year that we are taking in $300 billion less than we're spending. It has gone down to what I think this year, I'm not sure it'll be $150, $170 billion. So we've come away, but obviously even that is a lot too much. It just adds to the national debt. So the question then is, how do you move toward a balanced budget? And that's really the driving question that Gingrich and his friends are dealing with. Now, in an overview, this is what Gingrich and his friends are proposing. And as you know, the House is different than the Senate. The House and Gingrich are more extreme right-wing than is the Senate. The Senate is quite conservative, but the House is really now probably as conservative a body as to the best of my knowledge we've ever had in America. It is really quite extreme. This is what they want to do. Number one, Gingrich and his friends want to move toward a balanced budget in 7 years. Is there anything holy about 7 years? No. Clinton wants to move in 10 years. We can argue that, but Gingrich wants it 7 years. Clinton wants it 10 years. Number two, while talking about the need for a balanced budget, Gingrich is proposing $245 billion in tax breaks over a 7-year period. So the first point that I want to make is that if you were home and you were saying, gee, we have a real debt, the credit card is exploding, we owe a lot of money, first thing we're going to do is spend more money. You would say, well, your wife would smack you on the side of the head and say, that's not really a good way to move toward a balanced checkbook, right? And she would be right. So the first thing is, while ostensibly saying that they want to move toward a balanced budget, they are giving very significant amounts of tax breaks. Now, you can argue, and I think you can argue reasonably, that given the crisis in the middle class, in the working class, that if I said to you, would you like another $500 and you're making $25,000 a year, you can use it. And I'm not going to argue against that. But the question is, should we, for a start, be giving tax breaks up to people who make up in the House bill to $200,000 a year? Do you think those are the folks that really need tax breaks? I don't think so. Second of all, when you're talking about tax breaks, should half of the tax breaks go to people making $100,000 a year or more? I don't think so. I don't think so. Should the upper income 1% get more in tax breaks than the bottom 60%? I don't think so. So the first thing to be said about Gingrich's effort to move toward a balanced budget, it's kind of weird when you're giving huge tax breaks to the wealthiest people in America. That's the personal tax breaks. In terms of corporate tax breaks, this hasn't gotten a lot of publicity, but you should know this. Some of you will remember in 1981 when Reagan became president and the Democrats controlled the Congress, they talked about and passed so-called tax reform. One of the aspects of that tax reform was that some of the largest corporations in America paid what in taxes? Any of you remember that? You remember that? They paid nothing in taxes. You had companies that made billions of dollars in profits, like AT&T, General Electric, DuPont, and others. Billions of dollars in profits. They paid less in taxes than you did. Well, this became such an outrage and such a scandal that in 1986, the Congress passed what was called the minimum corporate tax, and that said that no matter how good your accountants and your lawyers are in getting you not to pay taxes, you're still going to have to pay something in taxes. Gingrich and his friends repealed the minimum corporate tax, which means that corporations like AT&T and General Electric and Citibank may end up paying nothing in taxes. Okay. All right. Number two, if you're interested in moving toward a balanced budget, given the fact that the Cold War is over, you want to be thinking about whether you should be spending more on defense. I just talked to a gentleman in the back who reminded me correctly that no one in their right mind thinks this is a peaceful world, it's a wonderful world, wouldn't it be lovely to disarm America and not have a military budget. There's nobody who believes that. But on the other hand, given the fact that most of our defense posture and structure was developed against a superpower, a very powerful superpower called the Soviet Union, enormous army, nuclear weapons, KGB, and so forth and so on, that given the fact that the Soviet Union no longer exists, that their military spending has gone way down. Not to say that it's a peaceful world, it is not a peaceful world. Whether or not we should be this year spending more money on the military than we did last year is open to question. I don't think we should. Also, I think we should not be spending more on intelligence. That's the CIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency, and so forth and so on. Half of the CIA's budget, our intelligence budget, was targeted against the Soviet Union, which is probably appropriate. So given the fact the Soviet Union does not exist, I don't think we need to keep the CIA and that type of intelligence at the level that is being requested. So before we get into the specifics of the contract, let me reiterate. Gingrich wants to move toward a balanced budget in 7 years. At the same time, $245 billion in tax breaks, an increase in military spending. Okay. Now, if you're going to do that, if you throw all of that into the hopper, right? 7 years, moving toward a balanced budget, more for defense, more in tax breaks. Something has got to give. Let's talk about what's got to give. What Gingrich and his friends have proposed is clearly the most sweeping changes in the federal government since Franklin Delano Roosevelt was elected in 1932. And essentially, it is a major dismantling. And I will give them credit. They are not shy, they are aggressive, and they are telling us what they're doing. It is a major dismantling of virtually every federal program which has been of benefit to middle-income, working people, or low-income people. You name the program, and they are going after it. Just last week, the House Ways and Means Committee came up with its blueprint regarding their major area they're going to cut, and that is Medicare. Okay? They are talking about a $270 billion cut in Medicare over a 7-year period of time. And it is very clear that when you cut that much out of Medicare, several things have got to happen. Number one, which nobody argues, elderly people who are on Medicare are going to have to pay more out of their own pocket for the service that they're getting. And actually, they will be paying more out of their own pocket for a weakened Medicare, a system which is not as good as it is right now. That's number one. Okay. Number two, as part of their program, they are going to radically change Medicare and give people more choice. Well, choice is okay if you got the money to exercise that choice. It is not good if you don't. So I think the evidence is pretty clear that the basic Medicare program, which will continue to exist, will not be as strong or as good as the current program. People will be paying more for that. For those of you who do not receive Medicare and have the illusion that somehow today Medicare is this great program that is covering all of the senior citizens' needs, wait till you become that age, because it ain't. Medicare does not, if I go around the state and I talk to a lot of seniors, and they tell me over and over again that today they cannot afford their prescription drugs, for example. Medicare does not cover prescription drugs. Many elderly in Vermont cannot afford prescription drugs. They have to often buy Medigap to cover the deductibles and co-payments that Medicare requires. So Medicare today is not a great program. If it's made weaker and if elderly people have to pay more for it, there will be a lot of problems. Now, the Republicans are proposing a $270 billion over a 7-year period. Everything I'm saying is 7 years, 7-year period for Medicare. What about Medicaid? Medicaid covers 3 groups of people, 3 populations. The low-income senior citizens. That's the way that low-income seniors get funding for their prescription drugs. That is the way that elderly people get into long-term care and nursing homes. In Vermont, the estimate is that some 20,000 senior citizens, disabled people, and low-income children will be cut from Medicaid. Those 3 populations. You have low-income folks, including mostly children, and you have the disabled low-income. If Medicaid is cut, the estimate for the state of Vermont is that some 20,000 people will lose their insurance. Now, given the fact that I and many of us, others in Congress, many of you, believe that in America we should be providing health insurance for every man, woman, and child as a right of all people, it is a major step backward when we say to the weakest and the most vulnerable, I mean, what are we talking about? What about a mother who's trying to raise a kid who is disabled, low-income mother trying to raise a kid who's disabled, and we're going after those people? We don't know what's going to happen, and we don't know what happens to the elderly who are currently on Medicaid. What we do know is, as part of this transfer, there's another thing that I want to say. You see, Rush Limbaugh and his friends, they say, well, it's not really a cut. What we're really doing is simply transferring the program from the federal government. We're block granting it, we're giving it to the states. We could argue the merits and the demerits of block granting, and there's something to be said for both. Some good aspects about it, some bad aspects about it. But keep in mind that what they're doing here is not only giving the power to the states, but they're cutting funding substantially. So if Governor Dean were here, we would say, well, Governor, we're going to give you the same amount of money. Do you think you could do the job better? He'd probably argue with intelligence that, yeah, I think we could do it better. Vermont's not California, give us the flexibility. But if we say we're going to cut back substantially, And in terms of Medicare, over a 7-year period, $356 million less is coming into Vermont. Medicaid, substantially less money is coming in. No governor, no legislature can deal with those problems. And their alternative will be one of two things. Either going to have to raise taxes in the state of Vermont and in every other state in the country, or else those people are going to be left out to dry who are cut. So once again, 20,000 elderly people, disabled people, and children and low-income folks could well lose their Medicaid coverage as a result of these cuts. Also in these cuts, I was just talked the other day to the guy who's head of the Vermont Hospital Association. On average in our state, about 55% of the revenue that comes into hospitals comes from Medicaid and Medicare. If less of that money comes in, what's going to happen? Well, you're seeing some of the consolidations already taking place, but what happens to little hospitals up in Newport, or down in Brattleboro, or in other rural areas in the state of Vermont? Clinton was on the phone talking to the guy from the St. Albans Hospital yesterday, and all over America today we're seeing the decline of rural hospitals. They can't make it. Everyone seems to be in agreement that if there are major cuts in Medicare and Medicaid, we'll see the demise of more rural hospitals. How that plays in Vermont, we don't know, but it could endanger a lot of smaller hospitals, rural hospitals. Let me just touch a little bit more on some of the other programs that are being cut. Most of you are familiar with the LIHEAP program. That is the fuel assistance program that goes to low-income people. Many elderly people utilize that program as well. It is an intelligent program, especially, obviously, in states like ours, where the weather gets 20, 30 below zero. So what you're looking about, of all of the victims of Gingrich's attack, probably it's the elderly who are going to be hit the hardest. So you're looking at folks who stand the chance to lose, have to pay more for Medicare, have to pay more for Medicaid. There are some people, by the way, who are talking about cutting the COLA for Social Security. I don't know if that's going to happen. And then, if you're low income and you're elderly, and you're getting fuel assistance to help you pay the fuel bills in February and January, that in the House bill was completely, it was zeroed out. The Senate bill was close to level funded. We will see what happens in the conference committee. That's still out there to be fought. For low-income people, you know, we all observed, and probably over-observed, the O.J. Simpson trial, right? We had enough of O.J. Simpson, but we saw what money can do in terms of legal protection. The House proposes to eliminate completely the Legal Services Corporation, which is the mechanism that provides, as you know, legal help, and they do a tremendous job. These men and women in the legal service are overworked, but they do a really good job in protecting the elderly people, protecting, well, all people who are low income, getting some legal protection. That will be, under Gingrich's proposal, not in the Senate, but under Gingrich's proposal, that would be eliminated. Some of you who work in, say, construction or other types of jobs, we have seasonal employment, have utilized extended unemployment benefits. That means you get 13 weeks, but when the economy gets bad, you're entitled to another 13 weeks. That additional 13 weeks would be eliminated. So in the midst of a recession, and you're laid off, you get 13 weeks, and then forget it. No matter how bad, how high unemployment is, no matter how difficult it is to get a job, you ain't gonna get additional unemployment. The Summer Youth Employment Program, and I had the opportunity a couple of weeks ago to speaking to some of these cases. In Vermont, it works very well. It gives low-income kids the opportunity to earn a paycheck, to get some discipline, get some skills that are important to their pursuing jobs afterward. Works very well in Vermont. It works very well all over the country. You know, we tell kids, go out, don't do drugs, go out and get a job. The youth employment program would be zeroed out in the House. The VISTA program would be zeroed out. RSVP. Some of you are familiar with the RSVP program. Very nice program for senior citizens. It gives them a chance to volunteer for their community. I have used them when I was mayor of Burlington. It really is nice. It's good for the people who utilize the seniors as volunteers. It's good for the seniors. Gives them something to be doing. That would be zeroed out. National Endowment for the Arts, which plays a very important role in schools, would be under Gingrich zeroed out. Corporation for Public Broadcasting over a period of time would be zeroed out. Mass Transit Operating Assistance, which goes to groups like the CCTA to help them keep fares down so people can get to work if they don't have a car, would be zeroed out and eliminated. Incredibly enough, when everybody was concerned about drugs in the school, they would zero out the Safe and Drug-Free School program, very intelligent program that tries to help kids stay off of drugs, give kids, vulnerable kids, the help they need. That would be zeroed out. Massive cuts in education, which will mean, I mean, you got to stop and you shake your head. Everybody, every businessman, every politician who gets up in front of the television screen says, we need our kids to be better educated. It's a competitive world out there. We're, competing against Japan and all these other countries. Cuts, major cuts in education, which will mean, again, one of two things. Either those cuts take place in Vermont and the quality of our education gets lower, or else towns like Colchester are going to have to pay more in property taxes in order to make up the difference. And your town officials will have to make those decisions. The TRIO program, I remember a couple of years ago talking to some low-income and working-class kids who were up in Johnson State for a program. And what the TRIO program is about, if your mother or your father is on welfare, if nobody in your family has ever gone to college, right? It's pretty scary. Do I have the confidence in myself to go to college? Can I do well? Well, I have this program, and they did really well here in Vermont with it, where they bring these kids, they take them to a campus. They took them to Johnson State. I think Linden State has something. They get the kids to meet college professors. They give the kids, they keep their eye on these kids, and they say, listen, stay in school, hang in, you can do it. You're as smart as anybody else. Even if nobody in your family has ever gone to college, even if your mom is on welfare, you can do it. That program would be eliminated, and it will make it much, much harder for low-income kids to go to college. But then again, as a result of these cuts, it's going to be harder for everybody to go to college, not just low-income, but the middle class as well. Many of our families have used the Pell Grant, the Stafford Loan Program, which was developed by Senator Bob Stafford of Vermont, as a means to supplementing the amount of money that we can put to our kids' education. Those programs are going to be cut, as well as, I mean, there's a long, long list of programs that will be cut. Now, what's happening right now in Congress? Right now it is obviously heating up. Just last week, as you may have seen in the papers, the AMA struck a deal with Gingrich behind closed doors to make sure that the doctors get their money that they want, which would mean even more cuts in terms of the beneficiaries. On the other hand, there were a dozen or so elderly senior citizens who walked into the committee room and wanted to testify. They were arrested. And people made the contrast that if the AMA and the wealthy doctors got a closed-door meeting with Gingrich and ended up getting breaks, no one knows exactly how much it will be, maybe billions of dollars, and the elderly who said, we want to testify. Now, one of the things that people are upset about, I mean, as you know, I'm strongly in opposition to all of this stuff, but generally speaking, fair play, it means that you got to debate these issues. You have to discuss these issues. Everyone is in agreement that Gingrich and his friends are trying to rush these enormous changes through as quickly as possible. Why? Well, the answer is obviously why. The more people learn about these programs, the more public opposition there will be. Now, the good news is, as a result, I think, of the work that a number of us have done, people in America are catching on. And what you're seeing now is when the Republicans first came in, oh, everybody thought they were great, 99% of people, oh, Republicans great. And yet every single poll since, down and down and down and down. And when the pollsters ask people, do you think we should be making major cuts in Medicare in order to provide tax breaks for the wealthy, very, very, very few people think so. So the Republicans are now, and a lot of these guys, that I know in Washington, getting very, very nervous because the people are catching on to what they are doing. So that is the overview of what's going on. My own view is the best way that we can defeat these terribly inhumane cuts. And I would be the first to tell you, I mean, sometimes when disaster strikes, everybody has got to sacrifice. I mean, there's no argument about it. I'm not, but the reality is right now, when you have a situation when the richest people are becoming much richer, to give them more tax breaks makes 0 sense. When the Pentagon tells us they do not want more B-2 bombers, and Gingrich and his friends are fighting for 20 more B-2 bombers. How much does a B-2 bomber cost? Anyone in this room know? About $1.5 billion. Do you know what the entire budget of the state of Vermont is? just about that. So one airplane is equal to the entire budget for 1 year of a state of 560,000 people. And the Pentagon says, we don't want them. And Gingrich says, you're going to get them. $1.5 billion a plane. They want another 20 planes. They want more money into Star Wars, so forth and so on. So let me conclude by simply saying this. And I'm giving you a very partisan point of view, but you know where I'm coming from. I think to a large degree, to understand what's going on in Washington now is to look at the Federal Election Commission reports. I would strongly advise you, this is all public information, if you really want to know what goes on, write to the FEC in Washington and simply say, I want to know where this or that person or that party gets their money from. Money talks, and money is driving this agenda. What you will find from the FEC is that in the 80s, the Democrats got a whole lot of money, from corporate America, and so do the Republicans. Right now, almost all of the money, a lot more money is coming into the Republican Party. Gingrich himself has a PAC called Go PAC. Huge amounts of what they call soft money is coming in. And what you should understand the contract with America to be is really a contract with upper income people. They are paying for this agenda and they are getting back what they are putting in as an investment. I would urge people, Gingrich thinks he will get away with this stuff because he believes, with some truth, that most Americans have given up on the political process. They don't get the information they need to make good decisions. Half the people aren't going to vote. Working people and poor people don't vote. He believes that he can play off one group against each other, the whites against the blacks, the straights against the gays, get everybody to hate the immigrants and the welfare recipients. You throw these things out and divide America into 50 different ways, and he gets away with it. That's what they are trying to do. They are raising enormous sums of money. Come election time, believe me, you're going to be afraid to turn on your television set because all you're going to see are these ads coming that are paid for by the wealthiest people in America. So how do you defeat this stuff? I think we have got to do what ordinary people, what we have not done, is people are going to have to be a lot more active and a lot more committed than they have in the past. If you want to preserve Social Security, you want to preserve Medicare, you want to preserve the right of young people in America or all people to have an education, if you think that low-income kids are entitled to decent nutrition, we're going to have to fight very, very hard. Okay? So that's the overview, and that's the end of my remarks, and I'd be delighted to take any comments, any questions, any thoughts that you have. Probably just stand up and be as loud as you can so everybody can hear you. Way in the back. Yeah.
Bernie, I wanted to ask you about this Moynihan suggestion on the COLAs and whatnot, that it's figured incorrectly, it should be refigured, and it would save enormous sums of money and be an easy way to help balance this budget. I don't know where you stand on it.
I'm strongly in disagreement with Moynihan. See, what Moynihan is saying, what they keep doing is playing off one group against the other, okay? I mean, Social Security, I don't have the numbers in front of me, obviously is an enormous amount of money, right? So all you have to do is you say, well, I tell you what, now the Republicans originally came up with that idea. They wanted to refigure the COLA. Now, honest economists could argue what is a COLA. Inflation now is very low, right? We can disagree. But what they were trying to do is to develop a configuration which would essentially shave half a percentage point or a point. Now, that is not just for senior citizens. That will be for every veteran in America. Anybody who receives benefits that are tabulated via COLAs would get less. So it saves the government a whole lot of money. But what about the people on the other end? You know the same senior citizens that I know. Now, we may think, oh, hey, what's a couple of $100? No big deal. But I'll tell you, if you're getting $9,000 a year and you got to pay the fuel bills in Vermont and you need, the kinds of help that elderly people need, it is a lot of money. So as I mentioned earlier, and I'm happy to go into it, I believe we can move toward a balanced budget, but I don't think that's the way you have to do it. What Moynihan says, and of course the Republicans are jumping for joy because they were afraid to say it. Now they have a leading Democrat saying, they said, well, we support Senator Moynihan. He's a Democrat. Let's work together. Let's look at how we can move toward a balanced budget to be fairer than cutting Social Security. Okay? What about corporate welfare? Anybody in this room know what corporate welfare is? Corporate welfare, and I'm very proud to tell you that as chairman of the Progressive Caucus in the Congress, as 48 members, we have led the effort in terms of corporate welfare and fighting corporate welfare. By corporate welfare, what we mean is the expenditure of about 125 billion taxpayer dollars a year in terms of tax breaks and subsidies that go to upper income people and to wealthy individuals. Let me give you just one very simple example. Anybody in this room live in a home worth $2 million? People laugh. What about $1.5 million? What about $1 million? Anybody in this room have $1 million mortgage on their house? Okay. You are in the same boat as me and about 97% of the people, 98% in Vermont and throughout America. Now, in the event that you strike it rich and you win the lottery, okay, and you rush out and you buy yourself a multi-million-dollar house, let me tell you what you can do, okay? Or maybe you want two houses, one in Vermont, one in Florida. It gets cold in the winter, right? This is what you will be able to do with your, you take $1 million or more mortgage, you are able to deduct, many of us utilize the home mortgage deduction. I do, you do, right? Most of us do not live in $1 million homes. If you have a multi-million-dollar home, you can deduct up to the interest on your mortgage up to $1 million. If we did nothing more than lower that level from $1 million down to $250,000, cover deductions up to $250,000, we would save the government $10 billion a year, and the only people who would be affected are maybe the upper 3% of income people. We will introduce legislation to do that. Gingrich and his friends obviously will vigorously oppose it. You will be happy or not so happy to know that you are spending your taxpayer dollars for an organization called OPIC, Overseas Private Investment Corporation, takes your tax dollars. You know what it does with your tax dollars? It helps General Electric and Citibank invest abroad. That's a good use of your taxpayer dollars. You're giving subsidies to utilities, you're giving up and down the line, and we can, if you want to ask me questions about it, we estimate that we can save about $125 billion a year. Second of all, in terms of taxes, right now, corporate America is contributing a significantly less amount of revenue to the federal government than used to be the pay case. Middle class is paying more. Wealthy in corporate America is paying less. If we had a fair tax system that asked those folks who really had the money to start paying their fair share of taxes, we can raise a lot more revenue. So to answer your question, I'm sorry I went on for too long. I do believe we have to move toward a balanced budget, but I don't think you have to do it on the backs of the elderly, on the middle class, on working people, low-income people. And Moynihan's suggestion is simply, he says, well, I want to save Medicare, but I'm going to do it by hitting the elderly on Social Security. I don't agree with that at all. Okay, other thoughts or questions? Yeah. Well, the contract is just terminology. It's the whole contract with America was based on polling. It was all based on polls. What the Republicans did is they did extensive polling and they got buzzwords, okay? So they said to the American people, do you want to see this country move toward a balanced budget? Would you support a balanced budget amendment? Oh yeah, I would, absolutely, 75% of the people, I want to see a balanced budget. But then if you ask people the next question and you say, would you support a balanced budget amendment if it cut Medicare, Medicaid, education, veterans programs? Oh, no, I wouldn't do that. Overwhelming opposition. They only asked the first question. So all of the term contract with America, it's a gimmick. It's a gimmick, nothing more. These guys are tremendous in sound bites and gimmicks. Is it legal? All that the contract is 10 separate proposals, which then became, out of which became legislation, which is certainly legal. Is it legal to dismantle Medicare and Medicaid and cut education? Yep, it is. If you got the votes to do it, they have the votes. But again, I want to reiterate, and the role that all of us can play is they control the House, they control the Senate, they do not control the White House. If the president vetoes the Medicare legislation or any other legislation, I will vote to sustain that veto. I believe to override a veto, you need 2/3 of the House, 2/3 of the Senate. They don't have it. They do not have it. In my humble opinion, Clinton's veto will be sustained in every instance in the House and in the Senate. And what I and others in the House, and I'm sure in the Senate as well, are telling the President is stand tall, take out your veto pen, the American people will support you. Expose these people for what they are, and they are vultures. And the more, as I mentioned before, the more the American people are learning about what they are doing all over this country, there is opposition to it. As many of you should know, as I hope you all know, I'm not a Democrat. I'm an independent. I have very serious concerns about a whole lot of Clinton's policies. But it is very clear to me that given the differences between Clinton and Gingrich, right now we have to stick with Clinton and we have to bolster his backbone and tell him to veto it and get the word out to the American people. And I can tell you that my Republican colleagues in the House are getting very, very nervous. As they're going home and people are saying, they're beginning, the American people are not the most sophisticated political people in the world. We have to acknowledge that. But even in the United States, people are beginning to catch on saying, no, it doesn't make sense to me to cut Medicare and Medicaid and give tax breaks to the rich. Why are you doing that? So, yeah.
To further that point, Bernie, the fact that Newt Gingrich is now in and has what he seems to be saying is a mandate, it strikes me that so few people voted this last time that maybe Newt is a fluke. How do you...
That's a very important question, and it gets to the root of politics in America. What frightens me very, very much is, as some of you know, the United States has the lowest voter turnout of any industrialized nation on earth. Just north of us, 30 miles north of us, 50 miles north of us in Canada, they get 70, 75% of the people out. Sweden gets 90%, Europe, 60, 70, 80, whatever it is. We get, in this non-presidential election, 39%. The presidential election, a very hot one with Perot in there, right? Pro-Bush and Clinton, great deal of excitement, all of 55% of the people. And then what's even worse is, I used to be mayor of Burlington, you all know that, and I used to go through the housing projects there. Low-income people don't vote, 10, 20%. The ones, and what is really ugly about Gingrich is he takes money for the rich and he bows to their needs, and he knows that poor people don't participate, and he goes after them. I mean, it's really like stealing out of the church basket. It's bad stuff. To go after the weak and the vulnerable because they can't fight back. So to answer your question, I think we've got, and I like your ideas about it. I mean, you will all know people who don't vote, right? You say, well, did you vote? Nah, it's all crap. All the politicians are bums. They're all crooks. I don't understand the issue. I only have one vote. It doesn't matter. I mean, we've all heard those stories. I would say if we could do nothing more than raise the voter turnout to 65%, Gingrich is finished. He's gone. He is ancient history, okay? Now, as you know, I'm not a Democrat. I think we need to develop a progressive movement, which is a lot more than the Democrats. But at the very least, what Gingrich and his friends want, and this, I tell you the truth, they do not want people to vote. They may tell you otherwise, they don't. There was a bill called the Motor Voter Bill. I don't know if some of you are familiar with it. What it does, in Vermont, by the way, in terms of electoral law, we're pretty good. We've got some problems. We're a lot better. You want to run for governor, you go out, you get 1,000 signatures or something like that. You run for governor. You want to run for Congress, 500, whatever it is. You want to run as an independent. It is not difficult, okay? Other states, you go to New York State, oh my God, to run as an independent, you got to spend millions of dollars to get signatures and all this other stuff. But even in Vermont, if you just a few things, what happens if you're not the most politically sophisticated person in the world? Well, you got to go out to the town clerk's office. But you're working. You get up in the morning at 6 o'clock, you get back at 7 o'clock in the evening. When do you register to vote? Okay? So we want to do better. Motor Voter was a start to make it easier for people to vote. Send in a postcard. Republican governors all over the country did not follow the law, opposed it, and in the House, they want to repeal Motor Voter because it makes it easier for people to vote, especially low-income people. Gingrich, to be honest with you, would like to see the day come when maybe the upper income 20% of the people voted, and those are the only people who voted, and then the very richest 1% contributed a huge amount of money to the candidates who represent the upper 20%. That would be democracy, according to Gingrich. And what we have got to do, and I would love your suggestions, you know people who don't vote, right? How do we get the word out to those people that if they're concerned about their parents or Medicare and Medicaid or Social Security, senior citizen housing, you have senior citizen housing here in Colchester, don't you? We have senior citizen housing in Burlington all over the state, decent housing. There's not going to be any more building of senior citizen housing. They've stopped that completely, no more. Okay? So for the elderly people, for the kids, everybody here is worried about how do you send your kids to college. Right? It's terribly important. I haven't even gotten into the environmental implications. I haven't even gotten into women's rights and a whole bunch of other stuff. But people have got to understand that if they're concerned about their families, they must participate in the political process. And then I have to tell you, the media does not make it easy for people to do that. You can read, you know, the mass media and the corporate media till you're blue in the face and not necessarily know what's going on. It's pretty hard to. But we have got to do our best to get people involved in the political process.
Part of it would seem to be the fact that many of these people who say they don't vote because it doesn't count, it's because they aren't aware of the fact that politics is the art of the possible. I don't like everything that Bill Clinton has done. On the other hand, he's the only act in town to represent my
Exactly.
point of view.
Exactly. So what they do, and I'm sure that everybody here doesn't like everything that I've done, and that's democracy. I don't like everything you've done. You know, your wife doesn't like what you've done, right? But what people have got to understand, you know, in the real world, that's what it's about. I have to represent 560,000 people, and not all of them agree with everything that you agree with. I have to do my best, okay? And Clinton has to do his best, and so forth and so on. And what intelligent politics is, you analyze all of the facts, you say, okay, based on all of that, is this person better representing my interest and my family than the other person? That's what democracy is. And honest people have honest disagreements, right? That's fine. But when people say, oh, geez, I have Bernie Sanders, I disagree with him on that, I'm not voting, or Howard Dean, or Bill Clinton, or anybody, you know, Republican, Democrat. We have got to become more sophisticated as citizens in a democratic society. So you don't agree with me on everything, fine. And you don't want to vote for me, that's fine too. But make an intelligent analysis about what's going on and see who represents your interest. But to say that the candidate or the president is not perfect, I'm not voting, is plain stupid. President is not perfect, no member of Congress is not perfect, and none of you are perfect. We do the best that we can do. Yeah.
So many things that I'd like to say, Bernie, point with you, but basically, you mentioned in the last 40 years the Democrats.
I can't hear you.
See, Bernie mentioned that the last 40 years the Democrats have been in charge. Basically, it's not the last 40 years, it's the last 60 years. Democrats have been in charge of the United States since 1932. Everybody say Roosevelt, and a lot of people are still voting for Roosevelt. But as a matter of fact, in the last 60 years, the Republicans have held the House of Representatives for 4 years. And now this year. The Republicans have held the presidency and the Congress in the last 60 years, 2 years. Clinton has had the presidency and the House and the Senate in his 2 years. All of the Democratic presidents have held the House and the Senate, except for Truman for 2 years. No Republican president ever has. So the corporate welfare that Bernie talks about has been put in place by the Democrats. The $5 trillion debt we've got now has been put in place by the Democrats. The next...
I just forget that. What happened in the Reagan years?
Yeah, the Reagan years...
This is what I'd like to do. It's your floor, one second. Okay, let's give them a chance to respond, and then people hold it.
The Reagan years, if we were going to put the Reagan years and the responsibility of Reagan as far as the debt is increasing, we would put Clinton responsible now. During the Reagan years, the Democrats held the House of Representatives and had held it since 1932. So here's Reagan coming in with his proposals, and what were the Democrats who had been in charge for, at that point, what, 40 years? Saying your programs are dead on arrival. Just as Clinton's programs coming in now are dead on arrival. So to put responsibility on Reagan when the Democratic Congress said no way is not really fair.
Let's talk about the national debt.
Let's talk about the
Yeah, let's talk about that.
The national debt is
Okay, let's,
over the next, over the
sir, let me give, let's get this straight.
Create a bigger national debt. Reagan, who are we talking about?
Who had the purse strings during?
No, you're avoiding.
The purse strings during
President Reagan created the largest, we both can talk.
Yeah.
It's my turn. Okay? President Reagan created the largest national debt that all the presidents from the beginning of time was up to Reagan.
So you think now that Clinton's going to?
No, not Clinton. We're talking about Reagan.
I'm saying.
I'm talking about Reagan.
Yes.
Forget Clinton.
You're saying that
Forget
because the
Clinton.
national debt increased during Reagan, it was Reagan's fault. Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm saying it's not his fault. Why did it happen?
Because the
He was the
Democrats
president.
said, the Democrats said if you want to end the
Democrats-
Cold War, you are going to pass social programs.
He could have vetoed it. He could have vetoed it.
He did veto an awful lot.
Oh, he did?
He did. Which one?
Which one? Yeah.
I'm going to listen right away. The fact that
You're lost. You're lost, my friend, you're lost.
See, what you're missing here
Yeah,
is
respond a little bit to this statement on this Reagan not being taxed or free of any responsibility. He had some friends, and they're corporate friends that were Democrats. And they're the ones that really put the kibosh to the Democratic Party. You can see it happening right now, where they're abandoning the Democratic Party. He's the one, Reagan's the one that got us into this debt. It was his leadership that got us there, and nobody else. Our debt was less than $1 trillion when Reagan took over. And look where it is now, and it's all because of him.
Well, look, you see, this is interesting. What has really ballooned today? Social Security and Medicare.
Hold it.
Hey,
I tell you what I call it.
The Republicans.
What I put Colchester was a nice, quiet, calm town. Respond to that. I'll give you another shot later on, okay? I don't want to stop this into a, you know,
the seniors
yeah.
have never done anything to increase the debt. Where they're getting the benefits from, the Congress is raising it to pay for the national debt. When Reagan gave those tax breaks, those 25% or the 25%, they went to the extremely rich. There's where our debt started. He upped our military budget way out of proportion, where there's no need for it. There's where our deficit all come from.
Military budget at least ended the Cold War.
Only on that one, mister.
I think the answer, if I may be, excuse me, sir.
During Reagan's period?
Sir.
Did the Cold War end during Reagan's period? No.
Okay.
No, it didn't.
I would say that in general, if I may, give my 2 cents on this, the general consensus is the deficit zoomed up during the Reagan period, which the Democrats controlled the House and the Republicans had the Senate for a few years. Democrats had it most of the time. Is that the Democrats worked in many instances with Reagan to do the following things. Number one, huge tax breaks to the rich and the large corporations, which is directly responsible for a significant part of the debt. Major increase in military spending, and Medicare also went up. But Medicare, when you look at the cost of Medicare and Medicaid and it going up, it has to tie into the whole healthcare system. It's not just Medicare. It's Blue Cross Blue Shield, right? And why we have today, that's a whole other issue, the highest cost per capita in healthcare in the entire world. That's a whole other issue. But those, I think, are the 3 reasons. Tax breaks for the wealthy and large corporations, military spending, and Medicare. Yes, right here.
On a national level, I see less and less difference between the Democrats and the Republicans. And the question I have has to do with something that has just confused me and made me really curious. And I think it's evidence of the lack of difference between the Democrats and the Republicans, because I don't know how many Democrats supported this Pentagon funding. Now, you got the Pentagon, which is not exactly a left-wing think tank, saying they don't need this money. And now the Congress, like, what is it, 97-3 in the Senate, some ridiculous vote, saying, you know, we're shoving this money on you anyway. Now, how does that get justified? You can't, and
Excellent question. I would say, I agree with that. If you want to know the reason that I'm independent, I can't give you a better reason than that. And I'll tell you exactly what happened. I'll tell you why some of the people voted these super beat bombs. People are so frustrated. They look around, they say, my communities are falling apart, I got no jobs, these people are going to cut, all the infrastructure needs, they're going to cut education, at least, even if it's a stupid B-2 bomber that will fall into the sea, at least they'll have a job for a little while. It is a bad rationale. It is terrible. But you're quite right. I'll tell you a funny story, if I might. I was on the floor of the House. The defense budget was about $244 billion. And I was on the floor of the House that day because I was concerned about one tiny element of it. Some of you may know about it, this bonus for Lockheed Martin. You follow that at all? It was part of the corporate welfare we were talking about. So I got onto the floor of the House. I had a couple of amendments. And one amendment was, I said, Mr. Speaker, it does not seem to me to be very sensible that we provide $30 million of taxpayers' money to the CEOs of Lockheed Martin Marietta, who merged their companies and in the process laid off 19,000 workers. And to my surprise, must tell you, Republican chairman said, I agree. Democratic ranking member said, I agree, we accept. I nearly fell off my chair. They accepted the amendment, and we won it. But I was on the floor of the House during that whole day, and a guy pops up early in the debate, and he says, well, I want to limit debate to a certain number of time. And I had to jump up and say, wait a minute, this is $244 billion. The truth of the matter is there was very little vocal opposition to that. There really was. You're absolutely right. And the vote was very distressing. I don't remember what it was in the House. Overwhelming. Hell of a lot of Democrats voted for it, as well as almost all the Republicans. We try to lower the CIA and the other defense. They get, I can't tell you this, but if you read the Washington Post, they will tell you. I think it's $26 billion. And we try to lower it by 10%. And we got about 100 votes to do that. I'll get back to you later, okay? Way in the back there, yeah.
Why do we have to pay somebody like Packwood $90,000 a year when we've tossed him out? Why don't we pay him a pension forever as long as he lives?
That's a good, Bob Packwood, not Packwood. I was wondering if Packwood, I know a Packwood, but that's,
$90,000 a year pension. What's
Yep.
he need that for? Well, from me.
right? No?
When he was
Let me say a word about well, I can't argue with you, and that's something that the Senate will or will not deal with.
Who pays that? What department pays that all out?
That comes out of probably this, well, not of the pension, well, that actually may come out, I'm not sure, it probably comes out of the same.
Out of the retirement fund.
Yeah, that's right, that's right. In terms of pensions, what I do want to say, the reason that Packwood is going to get so much is he has been in office for a long time. They changed the pension situation, I don't know when it was before I was elected. So those of us, you'll be happy to know, if I have the misfortune of serving 30 years, but don't worry about it, I will not get that kind of pension. Also, but I want you, having said that, this is what I beg of you, because I hear this all the time, okay? I go around and people say, why don't we cut this, or why don't we cut this? Now, $90,000 is a lot of money, but you know what? We can cut every pension that every member of Congress ever gets, and it'll be about this much. The real money is when we're talking about why we spend $100 billion a year to defend Europe and Asia. Why we give $125 billion a year in corporate welfare. Why we have allowed the largest, most profitable corporations in America, owned by the wealthiest people in America, to pay significantly less in taxes. Your question is a good one, and you're right. And I think what you're really asking is, this particular fella, given what he has done, should you be paying his pension?
Yeah, but it's just multiplied over and over and over.
Right, but what I will ask of you, because I go around the state a lot, and people say, well, what about this and what about that? Please focus on the big, billion here and a billion there, it adds up. Okay, yes, right here. Yes, sir.
I'd like to know what is the Republican, or what is the rationale for raising what's the official rationale for raising giving tax breaks to the rich? How is this sold? Who buys it? Why?
That's called Reaganomics. And what the official the line is on this is as follows. And in one sense, you could argue if it's rational. On the other hand, I think it's a fraud. But this is what Gingrich would tell you. He would tell you that you have a company like General Electric or AT&T. And he would say, look, if we can cut their tax burden, they have more disposable income, what they're going to do with their money is invest in our communities. They're going to create more jobs, and we're all going to be better off. And as a result of it, all right, don't have to argue with me. I'm the chairman of the Progressive Caucus. You asked me to give you his defense, right? Don't mind. Okay. But that's their argument. Their argument is it's going to create more jobs, strengthen our economy, and so forth and so on. Now, if somebody were to tell me that we gave General Electric a tax break. And with that money, they in fact reinvested in our community. And they created decent jobs in our community. I'd be willing to look at that, but it's a lie. And the whole mythology of Reaganomics is that these same exact companies, you know what they're doing with their disposable income? Are they hiring more American workers? They're not hiring. GE, AT&T, I had a list of these things. Every, major corporation has downsized significantly. Downsized. Throwing American workers out on the street, you know where GE is going? They're going to Mexico. They're going to China. That's where they're going. So that's what they're lying. Although, what to tell you the truth, in Congress, they don't even try to argue it too hard anymore. They do that. But you don't hear Gingrich talk. They try to avoid that whole issue. But if they're forced to answer it, that's what their answer is. It'll improve our wages and create more jobs. Yeah.
I'd like to address an issue on Medicare. I haven't seen anything in the contract with America, their budget proposals to cut Medicare. I haven't seen anything there about what I call sleaze and greed. To explain it, I could maybe give you a couple of examples. A year and a half ago, I had a problem with my right eye. I went to an eye doctor, probably the best one in Burlington, supposedly. He says I had cataracts in both my eyes. I had an implant put in this right eye, still got the same problem. After about 6 months, he said to me, he says, well, he said, we'll take the cataract off your left eye and that'll take care of your right eye. I didn't buy it. So I got a good left eye, I'm going to keep it. This summer, I went to another doctor, an eye doctor in Middlebury, and he examined me. He says, you have no cataract in your left eye. He said, you got a retina problem in your right eye. So here the Medicare is paid, and I paid. It comes to $3,000, and it could have been double if I had let him do the other eye. And I still had the problem. I still got it. I called Medicare people on it, and the girl says to me, she said, well, did he do the operation? I said, oh, yes. She said, then he gets paid. I said, even if it wasn't necessary? She says, go see the medical board in your state. Well, they're doctors on that medical board, so to me that's a waste of time. Back in 91 or 92, I can't remember when it was, we were in Florida, and my wife had an angina attack, pretty bad. They had to rush her to the hospital. They got her stabilized there, but the doctor, he says, we ought to keep her in the hospital for a day, and, to see if things are going pretty good. Well, the next day, I left the hospital 4 o'clock in the morning. I come back about 10 o'clock. They already had 2 tests done on her. They had several more planned. We ended up, she signed herself out because we weren't going to do the test that they were. I talked with our doctor here in Burlington, and he advised me what to do. So that bill was about $4,500 for an overnight stay. I went round and around with Medicare on that one. We ended up with having a trial by telephone, or a hearing by telephone, and their comment was that the doctors had charged for inpatient visits when she was home. Charged for another doctor's visit that never occurred. Tests that were not authorized, the whole gambit. It could have been lots more if she'd have stayed there. But anyway, she's still here, and that was back in 91 or 92, so she got over that one. But going through Medicare on that one, they said that they're going to get the money from the doctors that were not authorized. And I got the feeling that never occurred. Ordinarily, when Medicare makes a payment on one way or another, I get a notice of it. We never got a notice that those doctors had returned any money. So I got the feeling that Medicare is protecting those doctors. And that's bad. And if they got rid of some of this sleaze and greed is what I call it, they got rid of some of that, we wouldn't have to be hit so hard with the seniors being hit hard in the Medicare.
You're absolutely right. There's no question but that there are billions of dollars of fraud, just the kind of things that you're talking about. And I think there is an increased understanding on that in Congress. There's going to be increased investigation. And that shouldn't be that hard to do. I mean, we need more investigators. If every dollar you spend there, you're going to save a lot. And that's what we've got to do. It is a serious problem, no question about it. Okay, let me get the people who haven't asked the first question yet. We'll do the second round. Anybody who hasn't asked the first question. Yes, Brittany.
I want to ask, how do we change what's going on?
Okay. And let me give you the answer, okay? In my view. As I mentioned earlier, Gingrich and his friends assume that you're fairly stupid, that A, you're not going to pay attention, it's too complicated, you don't like politics, you know, the football game is on, you got a lot of things in your life, and you don't have time to worry about this stuff. That's generally what their feeling is. And then if you do pay attention, he assumes that you'll fall prey to the 30-second negative ad that will be played like crazy 2 weeks before the election. That's they do marketing. When politics increasingly is a marketing, they know more about you and your views than you know about your views. They have now, this is how sophisticated they are. You know what a focus group is? Anyone knows what a focus group is? We've never done it, actually. You may do it, but what a focus group, a sophisticated focus group, this is how sophisticated it is. They take, what I guess they call electrodes, okay? And they apply it to your wrist and to your heart and so forth and so on. They put a TV ad on. And the TV ad is, we're going to stop gays from coming into the schools. And they measure people's heartbeat and how they respond to the buzzwords. You follow? Well, they want to know what you're going to respond to, taxes, welfare, and this, that, and the other. And they build ads quite around your physical. That's how sophisticated it is. They don't even ask you anymore, well, what do you think of this ad? But it's okay, not so good. They measure your heartbeat. That's called sophisticated politics. And that's increasingly what's going on. Democrats do it too. Now, well, the Republicans, I must give them credit. The Republican National Committee is the most sophisticated political organization in the world. They make the Democrats look like kids. I don't play that. Then compare that to us, and we're independents, and we're trying to figure out what we should do. We're worse than those guys are, Democrats. All right, what's the answer? This is what the answer is. You know, in life, we all get into our patterns. You know, we all live our lives, right? You go to work, you raise your kids, and I do my thing. I really urge you to break out of your patterns and get involved politically, okay? I hold a press conference. I hold a press conference Monday, my 8,000th press conference. So what? Bernie Sanders holds a press conference. Leahy holds a press conference. Jeffrey says something. So what? That's what we're paid to do. No big deal. Guess what? You start speaking up in your community. And you know what? Gingrich looks around and says, uh-oh, these are not professional politicians. You can have as much of an impact on all of these issues as I can have. I get on television, people say, oh, well, that's just Bernie Sanders, yeah? But you're not a politician. You don't run for office. You're just somebody who's concerned about what's going to happen to your community and your family. Okay? Now, I will give credit to political opponents of mine. I think Gingrich is very smart. They're raising money in a very sophisticated way. They know how to use the media and so forth and so on. I will also give credit to groups like the Christian Coalition. They are developing a strong grassroots method, organizing ordinary people around the issues that they are concerned about. We have got to do the same. Now, if you think you can just sit back and say, oh, don't worry, Bernie Sanders will do the right thing, and well, this, that, and the other thing, you're wrong, okay? There is a fierce right-wing political movement in America today, and it is growing, and it has a lot of money. And if you want to sit back and not be involved, they'll go after your Social Security, your health to go to college, your rights as women, and so forth and so on. You want to stop them? We can stop them. Now, what I know is I've been involved in politics for many years. You know, my politics are different than Democrats, and so forth and so on. But I know that there are a lot of decent, hard-working people who may even come out and vote for me. They're not vocal. They don't write letters to the editor. You know, they don't contribute $1,000 to the candidate of their choice. They don't send, any of you going to send $5,000, $10,000 to the Republican Party or the Democratic Party? You don't have that kind of money, okay? A lot of people in the state who do. So what can you do? You can stand up, do things, hold a community, hold a press conference, put issues on the ballot here in Colchester. You know how to do this stuff. Work with your friends if you're concerned about education, if you're concerned about Social Security. If you're a veteran and you're concerned about VA benefits, you know what we want to go after? They originally started, some of us stopped them. I mean, in the House, they were in the Senate. Going to make major cuts in veterans benefits. Thank you very much for putting your life on the line. Now we're going to cut the hell out of the VA hospitals. All right? You want to stop them? We could stop them. People have got to be involved. We can run them all over the place. We'll obliterate them because we have a lot more of us. People don't want to see Social Security cut. They don't want to see Medicare cut. They don't want to see education cut. They do not want to see tax breaks for the rich. Gingrich does not want people to be involved. Your job is to get them involved. And that's not what you usually do. You are involved. You would not have come out here today. You've got to be more involved. You've got to be on the phone. You've got to play an active role in political campaigns. This is not a political event here. But you have to decide who are the candidates you want to support and be involved. Take them on. We have far more people who support us when they know what's going on. They have a lot of activists. I'll give the NRA, the National Rifle Association. I'll give them a lot of credit. They played a very strong role. They almost defeated me. They don't represent the majority of the people in Vermont. They got an issue, they got money, they work very hard. Okay? Well, we got to talk to those folks, because many of them should be doing this. But that's what I'm saying. You have to get out of your usual lifestyle, because they're going after you. And you're going to have to do what is uncomfortable. How many of you would feel comfortable being in front of a TV camera? I do it every day. It's not a big deal for me. It would make you'd be nervous about it. Well, then be nervous about it. But start, if you're an educator, you're concerned about your kids in the schools, let's go. Let's get involved. The other thoughts, yeah.
You raised the question, point earlier, which I think is important. We can argue till doomsday about who is responsible for the debt and all, but how do we get people out to vote? You said, I don't know. I don't know either, but it seems to me that that is the key. And I know you've got some live wires in your office, and if they come up with some scheme, a scheme is the wrong word, but idea, getting people out to vote, as you said, another 10% make a terrific difference. I don't know how you do it, but there's got to be a way to get people out to vote. I know it's hard in Vermont because everybody's independent. You don't know who's who. Is it going to change because of our primary? Are you going to have to say who you are, and so then you know who to call? How do you do it?
I have to tell you, I think it's the old-fashioned way, and I think probably in that respect, Gingrich will help us more than anything else. I think, and what we are seeing is people are beginning to wake up. And people are saying, uh-oh, I better get involved because they're going to really wreak havoc on my family. Obviously, we think of that not in our congressional office, but we think about it within our political movement. And we are especially concerned about how you can involve the people who don't have the money in the political process. And those people are so overwhelmed with the daily burdens of life that politics is like going to the moon for them, Politics, I don't have time. I got to worry how I'm feeding my family. So, I can assure you that there are numbers, and I'd love your suggestions. Why don't we stay on that? Because I think you're right. I think that's the $64 question. You talk to people who don't vote. You work with people who don't vote. You socialize with people who don't vote. How do you think we can get them involved? Who has thoughts on that?
Got to start with education, I think, Congressman. That's got to be number one.
I think you're absolutely right. People I cannot tell you, I go all over the state, I cannot tell you how people don't understand the correlation between what happens in government and their lives. It's like two separate things, Oh, I don't have any health insurance. Well, that doesn't have anything to do with politics. Oh, I'm making $4.50 an hour. Oh, that doesn't have anything to do with politics. I talk to veterans. When I first came in, they said, why did you cut my benefits? No one ever told me about it. Well, wake up. That was done in the 1990 reconciliation agreement. How many veterans understood that? Vast majority did not. 10 years later, they go to the VA hospital, they find it out. Oh, when did this happen? Right? And you're right, education, getting the word out. Look, there are people who disagree with me. I respect that. You disagree with me, right? Fine. That's what democracy is about. Much prefer to debate somebody than shoot somebody, right? That's what democracy is about. Discussion, disagreement. People will disagree. But people have got to learn and understand what's going on. And I'll tell you something else. This is my own personal opinion. I think one of the reasons we do worse in voter turnout than other countries is not just because the Democrats and Republicans are kind of alike and so forth. It's the role of the media as well. I think if you watch television and you only got your news, say we're watching Channel 3, you would not have the vaguest clue. You wouldn't have the vaguest clue what was going on. And a lot of people get their information from television. But we've been here for over an hour. We have barely touched the surface. Now, how will I be able to explain to you something in an 8-second soundbite? Think I can do that? I can't do that. The whole idea of how many of our kids have ever seen somebody speak for an hour on the major issues facing America? If we propose today, that people be allowed to talk for a whole hour or a half hour on the major issues facing America, people go, oh my God, we can't do that. We have a sitcom coming on. We got a murder show coming on. What do you mean, talk to America for a half hour? We only do that, Ross Perot can buy the time, right? And we have got to begin, if we're serious about being citizens in a democracy, we've got to accept that responsibility. And we've got to listen to what people have to say. We have to take the best of, points of view. But education the schools are not doing a good job, that's for sure, in that respect. The young people have a lower voter turnout than the older people. Do you know that? Okay, other thoughts? Yeah, in the back, in the back.
I was in New York City yesterday, and as I was driving out to the airport, I drove through, my taxi driver took me up through Harlem and out across the Triborough Bridge. And in the middle of Harlem, I've seen it before, there's a very large flea market that's run by a Muslim group. It occupies a whole block and it's all fenced off. And when I went past there yesterday, I was struck by the fact that the biggest sign on this block in front of this flea market was a voter registration sign. And there they are in a non-election year trying to engage people in the process. And I know, I go to a craft fair here in Vermont, I go to anything here in Vermont on a non-election year. I don't see anything that indicates to me that the process is even happening.
Well, it is. Some of us are trying, but you're quite right. But let me just tell you something else. It's not only, the truth of the matter is, if you go to Europe, and I think in Canada, I'm pretty sure in Canada, there is no voter registration. You know why? Because when you're of voting age, you're automatically registered to vote. I mean, why should, if we have 18-year-olds can vote, why is there not an assumption that when you're 18, you're registered to vote? That's it, come in and you vote. The idea that we have to go knocking our brains out to register people to vote is already a problem. And many of us believe in what we call same-day registration, which is a way of saying that even if you're not officially registered, and North Dakota, I think, has that, by the way, one state has it at least, you walk in and you vote on election, you have identification. If you vote twice and you're committing fraud, you get thrown in jail, okay? But we want to encourage people to vote. Let's not kid ourselves. The system today tries to discourage people to participate in the political process. But given that, while we fight for those changes in Washington and Montpelier, we've got to do a better job in registering people to vote. Other thoughts on that issue? Okay, anybody who has not asked the first question, don't be shy. Yeah.
Could you please, for us, look into a crystal ball a little bit? What if Clinton's veto is sustained? What happens? And then, secondly, what if maybe he waffles or it's not sustained? What happens? And then, is the Republican agenda going to be felt around the country by the time of the '96 election, presidential election?
Already, as I mentioned earlier, I see all this stuff in Washington. I don't know how much comes back into the Vermont media. The Republicans are beginning to panic right now because Americans are catching on, and they're going way down in the polls. No question. Gingrich is extremely unpopular. More and more people, because they're aware of Medicare cuts and Medicaid cuts, are saying they do not like the Republican agenda. Now, what will happen is if we can sustain Clinton's, if we, first of all, get his backbone up, make sure that he does veto, and we sustain the veto, and I think we will, okay? Then what happens ultimately, with enormous contentiousness, an enormous debate, there will be some kind of compromise. So what will end up happening is there will be cuts in Medicare, which I won't like, and I'm going to fight as hard as I can. There'll be cuts in Medicaid. They will not be as savage as what the Republicans are proposing. Okay? It is possible in terms of that. Already we're seeing in the Senate, the Republicans do not want to give tax breaks to people making $200,000. I think they're talking about bringing it down to $75,000, but they're still talking about $245 billion in tax breaks. Clinton will knock that. I would be very, very surprised if you're going to see more than $100 billion in tax breaks. Okay, you may see less than that. And it certainly will knock down people making $200,000 a year. So what's going to happen is they're going to bring it forward, Clinton's going to veto it, and then you're going to see chaos and debate and viciousness and lies and everything else. And we'll see what comes out. My guess is what will come out is a lot less savage than what the Republicans wanted. And then the question is, how do the American people perceive what is going on, and who's going to be blamed for what? And welcome to the world of politics. Okay, yeah, we'll go around. If people have a second question or comment, then
I don't know how many people here know of the time when Social Security was started, President Roosevelt divided, the Republicans all voted against it. Years later, when they started Medicare, the Republicans voted all against it. Now, Gingrich is in, he wants to get rid of it.
Look, I mean, it's not hard. Again, the problem that we have is it's easy to understand. When Gingrich and his friends talk about opportunity and government deregulation and getting the government out of their lives, understand what they're saying. If you have millions of dollars, okay, you can go, you don't need Medicare, right? You don't need Medicaid. You don't need Social Security. You don't need help in sending your kid to college, correct? You don't need any of that stuff. So you can say, if I was a millionaire, get the government out of my life. Why do I want to pay taxes? I don't need that stuff. I got everything that I want. And in a nutshell, that's all that it is. Right? Does the government function efficiently and well? No, it does not. Should we be making a lot of improvements? Yeah, we should. But is it appropriate to say that in America, our elderly people should be able to enjoy the last years of their lives with dignity? Yeah, you know what Medicare has meant to tens of millions of Americans? You know what existed before Medicare? And you're right, Republicans, of course, opposed Medicare, and now they want to chop it down. Why? Because it's not complicated. They represent, by and large, very, very wealthy people. Those folks don't need Medicare. They don't need Medicaid. They're not eligible for it. They don't have to worry about student loans. They don't live in the senior citizen housing that the folks in Burlington and around this state live. They don't need that stuff. So from their point of view is, yeah, get the government off their backs. They don't need that government stuff. But for the vast majority, then what they've done, in a very sophisticated way, and Rush Limbaugh deserves credit for it, very smart guy. What they do is the government is terrible, it's awful, it's horrible. Get government out of everything. Sure, we can all send our kids to the private schools for $20,000 a year. What do you need public schools for? What do you need help when you're sick for? You know, you're rich. And that's what they've done. They demonized the concept of government. The gentleman over here talked about fraud in Medicare. He's right. I can tell you a problem in every single federal program. Problems exist. So what do? We throw the baby out with the bathwater and we say, no, let's make these programs better. Now, what they don't tell you about Medicare, okay, for example, just as an example, which program is more efficient in terms of paying money, despite the fraud, to provide health care as opposed to bureaucracy, Medicare or Blue Cross Blue Shield? Medicare is far more efficient, okay? Because it's a national universal program, okay? So, you know, we got private insurance companies which eat up a tremendous amount of money in profits, in high executive salaries, in paperwork, and bureaucracy. Medicare does better than they do. So the point is, in a civilized society, we've got to determine what our goals are. And what is our goals? Everybody, I think in this room, everybody, in my view at least, is entitled to health care, whether you're rich or you're poor. Everybody should be entitled to a decent education in this school and going to college. We should not have children in America who are hungry. People are entitled to decent jobs. And that's what the fight is about. But the Republican, and especially, and I got to say, not the whole Republican Party, not even the Republicans in Vermont. I disagree with these folks. But some of them are moderates who do not hold the Gingrich point of view. You know, who it's true. But the Gingrich point of view basically is the survival of the fittest. And what that is you're in it on your own. You know, I got the money and you don't. Tough luck. I live and prosper, you die. And that's the law of the jungle. And what civilization has evolved to is say, no. We all have an obligation to protect the elderly and the children and those people who don't have enough. That's what living in a civilized society is about. And they're trying to break that. And, you know, some of us are going to fight them as hard as we can. Yeah, back there.
What's the most positive thing that's happened in Washington since you were there?
Since I've been there, with the most positive?
Yep.
Not a very long discussion.
How about re-election?
Well, we all have to work that.
think when Clinton first came in, and I'm sorry he lost it, he had some tough choices to make, and he made bad choices. When he first came in, he put his finger on a number of issues. And his first speech to the House of Representatives, to the whole assembled Congress, was a very good speech. And I'm tough on Clinton, so I'm not easy on him. But it was a good speech. He talked about the fact that we had neglected our children for many years and wanted to increase funding for Head Start and make sure that all the children in America were fully immunized. And he talked about justice in a way that he hasn't talked about recently. Clinton's first budget, the Republicans lie about this all the time, but his first budget raised taxes, it did, primarily overwhelmingly on upper income people, and that was appropriate. Now you couldn't learn that. I'll tell you a story. And at the same time what he did is he expanded the earned income tax credit, which gave a tax break, not just to the working poor, folks making $25,000 a year. That's not poor in Vermont. I met with him, I remember this. I went to in Washington County, they have a fair, and I went around the fair and I had a meeting with Clinton the next day as an independent. Every now and then I go in and see him, I'm not Democrat, not Republican, so he has to hear from the independent caucus. So I go in and meet with him. So that day I'd gone around the fair and I said to people, do you know if Clinton's tax proposal was going to lower taxes for anybody? Oh, no, I don't know that. No. So next day I saw him, I spoke to 25 people in Washington County, Vermont. One person had heard about it. He said, I know, we can't get the word out. So with the Republicans, he's raising taxes on everybody. It's a lie. The vast majority of the tax increase went on upper income people. I would have raised their taxes even more. He in fact lowered the taxes on a lot more people than he raised them. But you can't get that through Rush Limbaugh or even through CBS. And he felt very, very frustrated at that. So I would say I was excited in the beginning because I saw a sense of optimism that was coming from Clinton. Then I think what happened, he made a tragic mistake in my view. He proposed to put some $17 billion, which is, in the great scheme of things, not a lot of money, into infrastructure improvement, into expanding the community development block grant program, other programs like that, which would put people to work to rebuild our communities. Dolan, the Senate, opposed him. They demagogued it. He gave up on that. And I think when he gave up on that, he gave up a lot. And then he started becoming more conservative than he should have been. The decision that he has got to make, and it's what we've been talking about today, is does he get working people excited? And also, this whole debate, I don't know how familiar people are in this room with NAFTA and GATT. Are you familiar with that issue? Okay, and in my view, he worked closely with the big money interests and with Dole and Gingrich. See, a lot of workers all over America were seeing their jobs going abroad, and they're saying, what's the difference between Dole and Clinton? Same. We oppose that very strongly, and history has proved, sadly, which wasn't the case, that we were right. It was a disaster. So I would say, to answer your question, when I heard a president of the United States talking about the need for universal health care, talking about the needs of protecting our children, talking about the needs of rebuilding our communities, that was a sense of optimism. And after 2 years of Bush, who was better than Reagan, but not very good, there was a sense of optimism and hope, and unfortunately he did not sustain that. Okay, any other questions, comments? Yeah, when you're ready.
I'd like to comment on the cost of healthcare, to get back to that. We've talked about Medicare, Medicaid. I work in healthcare, so I feel as if I can say that the cost of healthcare impacts on all of us, whether we're rich or poor, whether we count on Medicare, Medicaid, private insurance, private pay. My question is, what is anyone doing about the cost of healthcare?
What happened is, just to give you a little history, as you know, Clinton brought forth his proposal. I was not sympathetic to his proposal because it was enormously complicated. He was working with the large insurance companies and so forth and so on. But at least what he had is an idea. His goal was to make sure that every American had health insurance, and he had some mechanisms put in to control the cost of health care. As I think you're saying, I don't know if you are or not, the healthcare situation today is worse than what it was when he was talking about it. You have more people who are uninsured, the cost of healthcare is going up, Blue Cross Blue Shield rates are going up, and so forth and so on. And you're right, it touches on everybody, everybody. And by the way, one of the manifestations of Medicare and Medicaid are cut. Who do you think is going to pick up some of that cost shifting? You are, if you have private insurance, right? What's going on? Well, there are two things that are going on. One thing that's going on is the movement toward consolidation and the growth of HMOs. Okay? Now, essentially, you can control the cost of health care in various ways. To my mind, if we were to examine and say, well, why is it that in America we spend significantly more per capita than they do in Europe or in Canada? Right? That's a good question. How do we get that? But one of the answers would be that every time you have to fill out your form, and my wife goes crazy doing this, you got to fill out the forms, you send it to the insurance company, and they send it back, and they tell you that they're not, I want to tell you, people think, oh, Congress, no problem. I have the same insurance thing that the guys who work in the Postal Service have. We send in our forms, it comes back, they're not paying you. We've got to spend half our lives arguing with them. They cost a lot of money for arguing with them, right? They have to have people well paid to tell us why we can't get what we thought we were covered for, and so forth and so on. So we spend far more than any other country in terms of paperwork and bureaucracy and suing each other and so forth and so on. So a simple system, all right, that's the system. To get to the root of why the cost is so high, I think you want to look at all that bureaucracy and paperwork and why we continue to have 1,000 different private insurance companies. Now, the other way to do it is very simple. We can say, okay, you used to want to go to the doctor that you like, right? You trusted this guy who was taking care of your family. Well, actually, he's not within our HMO. You can't go to him. You go to Dr. X. You go to Dr. X, and you have a problem, and you're going to have to justify to a great deal, and your doctor will, as to why you need to go to see the specialist that you thought in the past you would go to, but you can't. Furthermore, if we send you to the hospital, my mother-in-law had this problem. She was in the hospital. She's 80 years of age, and they tried to get her out after 3 days, but she really wasn't ready to be gotten out. You can save money doing that. My wife didn't let it happen. That's another way. You can have a baby, and you know what? We can get you out of the hospital in 10 hours after your baby. Giving birth for the first time, you're scared to death, you're traumatized, we can get you out of the hospital. You save money that way too. So in other words, there are different ways that you could save money. Taking away people's choice of physicians, not allowing them to go to specialists, getting them out of the hospital earlier than they should be gotten is one way. That seems to be the movement. What some of us are trying to do is move this country toward a national health care system. I believe in a single-payer system. I think that's efficient, gives people freedom of choice in terms of doctors. But that's where we're at. Yes?
I don't have any problem with managed care. I mean, that's really what you were referring to. And I think my problem is, why is it that the docs charge so much and the providers, the hospitals, the nursing homes charge so much?
Well, then that's again good, because you have to appreciate you can approach healthcare in one of two ways. You can say, what is the most cost-effective way that we in the United States can provide healthcare to all people? That's number one. Or we can say, you got another business, you got the automobile business, you got the steel business, you got the healthcare business. How can those people who are able to make as much money as they possibly can out of healthcare? And that's the system that you're operating under right now. For example, you go to Addison County. I remember I was in Addison County a couple of years ago, down there, and talking to somebody. They were going crazy trying to get a primary physician, a plain old doctor, in rural Addison County. Meanwhile, you got all the specialists that you need, plus some in Burlington. Okay? And that has to do with the kinds of incentives that are built into our own healthcare system. If you were a young person, if you came out of medical school $100,000 in debt, what do you think you'd do? Do you think you would practice family medicine in rural Addison County? No, you wouldn't. Now, you become a specialist in New York City and become a left eye doctor or maybe a right eye doctor. And you would make huge amounts of money. And that's what the system encourages. For example, I mean, just one simple thing, and I believe in this a long time. If the state of Vermont, and there used to be a program, Reagan helped kill this program, it's still alive a little bit. If we had a program by which we say to young people, you want to become a physician, the state of Vermont is prepared to pay your whole bill. It's expensive. We're going to send you to the UVM medical school. You know what we want out of you? 5 years of public health care service in rural areas. I know there is, but it's not anywhere near it's in trouble. It's not. But we can solve some of these problems, but then you're running into the whole ethic of what the system is about, which is primarily to make money. Let me give you another example. Some of you may know, some of you have acute problems, and you go to the drugstore, you buy prescription drugs. How many of you know that the prescription drugs that you buy, everything being equal, will be a lot more than they are in Canada or in Europe or in Mexico? Do you know that? They're manufactured by American companies. Here, we had a debate, and I got 143 votes for this amendment. a situation where the National Institute of Health does a lot of research with your tax dollars to develop drugs which deal with cancer and other serious problems. And they've had some pretty good results. In fact, a lot of the most effective cancer drugs were developed by your tax dollars. It seemed to me, and at least 142 other members of the House, that if your tax dollars are going to pay for the development and the research in the drug, that when that drug is given over to private pharmaceutical companies, there should be a limit on what they should be able to charge, because you've already paid for it. Follow what I'm saying? Not give it to them, and they can charge anything they want. Well, we lost the vote, because the pharmaceutical industry is very, very powerful. It provides a lot of campaign funds for members of Congress. So there are ways that we can control the cost of healthcare, in my view, and I'm not terribly radical or crazy, but with Gingrich and his friends, we're moving in precisely the wrong direction.
Who is supporting this powerful lobbies? You know, is it Democrats or Republicans? Who are we waiting for that?
Right, this gets back to the point the gentleman made earlier about the similarity between the two parties. In the 1980s, for example, the Democrats had pretty firm control in the House. A gentleman named Tony Coelho, Tony was a congressman from California. He became chairman of, I don't know, probably Democratic National Congressional Committee. He went out and he told corporate America, he says, why are you giving money to the Republicans? They don't have the power. You better give it to us. You may not like us, give it to us. Democrats during that period raised more money from corporate America than the Republicans did. Now, however, Gingrich has made it very clear that they can't give to the Democrats, they only have to give to the Republicans, and they're going crazy. But that's the reality is. And you know, the discussion before about what happened in the 80s, it is wrong to believe that the Democrats were pristine and wonderful and great, and it was only terrible old Ronald Reagan. One of those tax Russ Murkowski was there doing his bit as well. You had a lot of Democrats who were acting exactly like Republicans. Okay. On the other hand, I got to tell you, there's some very good Democrats there who are progressives and are fighting the right fight. I work closely with them. Yeah.
Where is campaign finance reform?
Let's talk about campaign finance reform. If you were Newt Gingrich and your coffers were now overflowing with corporate PAC money, okay, with what they call soft money, okay, do you think you'd be serious about campaign finance reform? You wouldn't. What you would be doing is dealing with the issue, but how you would deal with it would only make a bad situation worse. For example, you'd come up with formulations that would make it easier for wealthy people to get elected and harder for people who represented working people like myself. So Gingrich's campaign finance reform would be precisely geared against progressives. I get money, for example, from trade unions and environmental groups and women's groups. They will go after my ability to get that money. My opponent will get $125,000 first day in the race from the National Republican Party. If anything, they'll want to honor that kind of money. Okay, they will encourage the rich to be able, one of the scandals that goes on right now, 25%, which more true of Republicans than Democrats, but it's true of Democrats, increasingly, the people who get elected are what? They don't have to worry about raising money because they're millionaires. Did any of you follow this guy Huffington in California? Guy took $28 million out of his own pocket. $28 million. And he ran for office. Fortunately, the woman he was running against is also a millionaire, you know. It's a race of millionaires. Ross Perot, I mean, whatever we want to say about Perot, and I think there's something positive to say, something negative to say, but what we can agree on, you would not know who Ross Perot is if he wasn't a billionaire. If one of you wanted to buy a half-hour time on CBS for $500,000 tomorrow night, you could also become pretty famous. Most of you don't have the $500,000. So to the degree that campaign finance reform means preventing big money from dominating the political process, Gingrich will stop any reform. To the degree that he can fool people and move in the other direction, he will go forward. Okay, my friend over here wants to tell you how much he agrees with everything I've said.
Yeah. Well, you know, picking up where you left off there, you know, it's funny, it seems to be an internal contradiction. Leaving? Yes, I have. I just did.
Are we going to listen here, or are you?
Yeah,
I'm still here.
They don't want to hear me, Bernie. They can't listen to you, so I'm not going to, I just want to ask one question if you know, Bernie. Why is, who am I? Just a citizen. Nolan Henry's my name.
What's your name?
Citizen of Colchester.
What is your name, sir?
Henry.
No, Henry?
No Henry.
Oh,
Right. Why, in view of all this corruption,
I didn't say the word corruption.
Well, influence
Yeah.
of people in the Congress. Why would we want to put this enormous amount of power in the hands of 530 people, really 300 people? Because the majority is what will prevail. You know, you have 60 senators and 240 representatives. You've got overwhelming majority. So you got 300 people. Why would we want to have a system that would invest enormous amounts of power in 300 people, one of whom can't even remember what the CIA budget was? CIA, I think it's 20 billion, 20 billion. I don't know. We're resigning the kind of, you said it was 26 billion, you weren't sure. Give or take a few billion. So here,
The budget is 1.5 trillion, and I cannot give you a line item.
Exactly. You're one of 530 people who have that kind of vague understanding.
Is that a criticism of me? Do you think the others know every line item?
No, absolutely not. They're equally unaware and uninformed.
Well, I don't think I'm uninformed.
Well, yes, well, you cannot possibly be informed about all of the issues that come before you that involve trillions of dollars.
I think that's a truthful statement.
Yes.
Neither I, nor Al, or anybody else, right?
Matter of policy, policy that you would advocate, resigning enormous authority in those 530 people, those 300 people, 535 overall, 300 people. Why would we want that?
I'll tell you why. Because whether you like it or not, we live in a democratic society. Okay, now when you talk about power, let me finish, okay? I would rather have power in a democratic society, a certain degree of power, not total power, okay, obviously, but I would rather have the ability of electing people to help me make this into a decent, humane society, rather than not having government. And then where would the power rest? It would rest with General Electric and General Motors and the millionaires, and they would say to you, you're going to work for $1 an hour. And if you don't want to work for $1 an hour, I got that guy because he's prepared to work for 75 cents an hour, because we don't have a government that has a minimum wage. And you don't have any health insurance, we can go back to slavery.
How many people are we talking about? How many people are we talking?
Who have power in America?
Top 1%. How many people is that? Oh, it's a billion. It's over a million.
That's more than a million.
Yeah, people. The top 1% is over a million people.
Yeah.
Why would we want to give power and authority to 530 people who wouldn't give it to million?
But you're not, I think that's the wrong question. It's not giving it to them. I can assure you. Let me
Let them keep it.
Let them keep it. They already have it. That 1 million people right now, one second. First of all, that 1 million people, you'll be happy to know, exerts enormous power over what goes on in Congress right now. In fact, those 1 million people are determined. It's not Gingrich. Gingrich works for those folks. That's number one. Number two, outside of government, are we talking about is government the only aspect of our society? Somebody goes to work on Monday, it's not that I'm working for me, they're working for their person who owns the business. So to suggest that suddenly 535 people have all the power in America and tell you what to do every day is very, very far from the truth.
Not all the power. Not far from all the power. But it seems to me what you would advocate is that those 530 people should get as much power as possible, certainly over the medical care system.
I would argue that we should have a state, right now, in terms of power over health care. Where does the power rise? How much do these folks have to say about what goes on in Blue Cross Blue Shields? Who's the head of Blue Cross Blue
They can
Shield?
leave Blue Cross Blue Shield.
Sure, they can go to Connecticut General.
Exactly. They
Yeah.
can go to,
But you see-
go to CHP.
That's
Yeah,
right.
They at least had some choices. But if it were your way, it could be one choice.
If it was,
This fellow here
one
said
second,
it.
one second.
I'll tell you why I went to CHP, because I couldn't afford Blue Cross Blue Shield.
Me
It
neither.
really wasn't much of a
Me neither.
choice.
I did the same thing.
But I had no power over CHP.
But you see, the idea that you are, Norm, the idea, and I don't want to argue with you all, no, that's not true. The idea, let's first of all set the record straight. The United States, not that it's better or worse, is the odd guy out in the world. As you know, every other industrialized country has a national health care system, correct? England has it, and Canada has it, and Sweden has it, and Germany has it, and France has it. Now, if your idea was such a good idea, then all over the world people would be saying, no, we want to go to the American health care system. Most countries in the world do not do that. We are the odd guys out.
I think, well, go ahead.
All right. The second point that we make in terms of control over a system. Every system, including our system and other systems, have problems. Now, the truth of the matter is, I would rather be in a position where I can go to my legislator and say, you know what? I think the kind of coverage that you're offering is not good. I want you to do something about it, as opposed to going, what, to the head of Blue Cross Blue Shield? They meet, as a matter of fact, I think behind closed doors. You have very little impact on the private insurance companies. So I do believe very much in the concept of a national healthcare system administered at the statewide level where people can have input into the system. It is more cost-effective, it is more democratic, and it will cover all of the people.
The word democracy, I guess, and this is where I might get really crossways with people, but you evoke the word democracy. What is democracy? Democracy is a system that says 51% of the people tell 49% of the people what to do. That's a system to which you should repair very hesitantly. As a matter of fact, as Bernie pointed out, the voting people, the number of people that vote, are what, 40%. And those are the voters, that's not the total population. So the number of people that are actually voting, making decisions, is what, 25% of the people. So here we are in a democratic system where 25% of the people are telling 75% of the people what to do. That's a system that you should use limited. I'm not saying, I'm not for anarchy. I'm for representative democracy, for a Republican form of government, which is really what we have. But use it sparingly. Do not turn to it and say, you are my savior. You are going to save me with Medicare, with education, with housing, with the environment, and down the list. Those 530 people are not that smart.
But at the same time, what you're saying, if you follow your line of reasoning, is that you would turn over the power to your group of million people or whatever who never see us, never speak to us. We have no opportunity to speak to them. At least with Congressman Sanders and this representative form of government, at least we have an opportunity to make a statement. Theoretically, the other way, we don't have it at all.
Well, I think you do. I think you can certainly boycott. You can boycott businesses. You can write letters to businesses.
They would not.
It would be very responsive.
No, I think you'll acknowledge that I gave you plenty of.
Thank you very much, Mark. I appreciate it.
Next time, you can hold the hearing. And
No, that's correct. We have the theology of thinking maybe China. I believe we better go with China.
Okay, well, let's
They're our number one trading partner, and they're coming. Why are they our friends?
That's the whole other issue. All right, yeah, all right.
Excuse me,
Yeah.
Bernie, I just wanted to ask, in this terms of education, like this little group here
Yeah.
today, I'm glad it was a small group, but small wonder it was a small group. I finally searched in the back pages of the Free Press and noticed that you were holding this today. Now, am I right, you're holding one in St. Albans
St. Albans tonight, that's correct. Yeah.
Well, I had that was in about a week ago.
I know. All right, let me just thank everybody for coming. I thought this was an enjoyable meeting, and thanks very much for coming. Bye-bye.
Okay, Bernie.